At home is normally considered to be our safe place, especially surrounded by your immediate and closest family. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case for the Van Breda family, when in the early hours on a January morning, Henri van Breda attacked his full family with an axe. So how on earth did this unthinkable incident unfold? The Van Breda family were described to be like any other close-knit family. They loved doing outdoor activities together, boating, water skiing, fishing and shark diving, just to name a few. They originally lived in South Africa before emigrating to Australia in 2006, when the eldest son, Rudy, was 13, Henri was 11 and the youngest, Marley, was 8 years old. The family had been living happily in Australia, but only 1 year before the attack, parents Martin and Teresa van Breda decided to move back to South Africa in January 2014. Martin wanted to return home for business interests, whereas Teresa wished to be closer to her family again. They moved with their teenage daughter Marley, while Rudy and Henri remained in Australia to continue with their studies at Melbourne University, where Rudy was studying for his master's degree in engineering. Although it's not clear what Henri was studying, while his two siblings thrived at school and university, Henri decided to terminate his studies in Australia to move back to South Africa with his parents later that same year in August 2014. The wealthy family lived in an upmarket housing estate in Stellenbosch called the Zalza Golf Estate, which is described as a medium-gated community. It's essentially a gated estate which has 24/7 security monitoring surrounded by an electric fence. It's considered to be one of the safest places in South Africa. Rudy and his girlfriend visited his family in their Africa home in December 2014. His girlfriend later returned to Australia in the middle of January 2015, with Rudy intending to follow a month later during the middle of February. Tragically, Rudy never returned to Australia. On the 26th of January 2015, the family were together like any other night. Henri and his dad were sharing drinks in the living room, and Rudy had nipped out for a run around the estate. Marley was up in her bedroom, while their mum, Teresa, was busy making the dinner. They later enjoyed dinner together at 7:15 p.m. before reportedly watching Star Trek II Into the Darkness. Throughout the rest of the night, the family gradually made their way to bed. Henri and Rudy shared a bedroom, where Henri stayed up until 3 a.m. watching an animation called One Piece on his laptop, before going to the toilet. It was while he was at the toilet that he started to hear really strange noises, so he peeked out from the doorway of the toilet and into his own bedroom to see that Rudy was laid in his bed being attacked by a masked man with an axe. Their dad, Martin, who had been startled by all of the noise, came to turn on their bedroom light and assist his son. Henri claims to have seen his dad lunge at the attacker like a rugby tackle in an attempt to protect Rudy. But the intruder just carried on with his frenzied attack, now while laughing, and also hit Martin in the head with the axe. Henri could then hear his mum's voice, but he could no longer see what was happening because the attacker had now moved out onto the landing, which was completely out of view of the toilet doorway. But he also doesn't recall hearing his mum being attacked. The attacker then noticed Henri and again while laughing approached him with the axe. Henri managed to remove the axe from the attacker's grasp, but then felt a knife in the side of his torso and a scuffle ensued. Henri then hit the attacker with the blunt end of the axe before removing the knife from his side. The intruder quickly fled and Henri followed him, at which time he caught a glimpse of his sister Marley and his mum laid on the floor. Henri threw the axe at the attacker, lost his footing and fell down the stairs, but continued to chase the intruder out of the back door. This was the story that Henri told the police the night of the attack, and also continued to maintain throughout court. However, evidence gradually mounted that contradicted Henri's claims. There was, in fact, no intruder. After their dinner on the 26th of January 2015, the family did make their way to bed one by one, and Henri stayed up late watching One Piece on his laptop. But then something just snapped. It was roughly 4 a.m. on the 27th of January 2015, and Henri van Breda entered the bedroom he shared with his brother, where Rudy was laid asleep. Henri approached his brother and just began to swing the axe at Rudy's head. It's then thought that their dad, Martin, had heard all of the commotion going on, and so he went to investigate and see what all the noise was about. But unfortunately, he too shared the same tragic fate as Rudy. Henri struck his dad in the back of the head and in the back with the axe. It is also thought that his mum Teresa and his sister Marley were investigating what was making all of the noise and commotion when Henri just continued his frenzied attack. He struck his mum in the head, followed by his 16-year-old sister Marley. The 20-year-old had just attempted to murder his full family. Upon completing the horrific attack, he made a phone call at 4:24 a.m, but not to who you'd maybe assume. He called Bianca, his 16-year-old girlfriend at the time, but the calls just went unanswered. He didn't know the emergency services phone number, so he then searched online for the number to call. The crazy thing about that is that there was actually a list, or like a magnet, stuck to their kitchen fridge that listed all of the emergency contacts that they could possibly need. Surely, living in that household, he'll have seen that multiple times, even just entering the fridge. Allegedly, Henri then passed out on the stairs for an unknown amount of time. From what he claims, it may have been from shock or his injuries, or maybe a mix of both. He later woke up and claims that seeing Marley just shocked him back into consciousness. He got up and sat at the kitchen counter where he smoked 3 cigarettes while finally calling the emergency services. This was over 2.5 hours after the attack had taken place at 7:12 a.m. Obviously, the extensive amount of time that it's taken for Henri to call the emergency services is really, really alarming. But initially, investigators considered this to be plausible with his alleged unconsciousness. Henri later told his defence that he panicked he wouldn't be able to communicate properly, and that since childhood he'd suffered with a stammer, which was reportedly worse with stress. During speech therapy, he learned a technique of speaking slowly and calmly, which would eventually calm his nerves, and that if he didn't, he'd end up getting stuck mid-sentence. He's had experiences in the past where South Africans would struggle to understand him, with his stammer combined with his Australian accent. Here's just a little clip of the emergency services call that he made 2.5 hours after the attack.
What is Stephen? What is your emergency?
Yeah. I need an ambulance. Lots of
You need an ambulance?
Yes, please.
What's your name, sir?
Henri van Breda.
Henri. What's the contact number you're phoning from?
My home phone number, but I'm not sure what the home phone number is. My cell phone. We're at 12 Husker Street, please.
What is this number that you're phoning from? Is there someone else that can speak if you're not able to?
No.
Who else is in the house?
There's no one else.
I need the contact number, please.
Yeah, okay. 021.
021. The ambulance to go to what?
Number 12, Husker Street.
What area is this?
It's in Stellenbosch, and it's in the Zolta estate. Yeah, can you please just send an ambulance, or more than one ambulance, to the Zolta Wineland in Stellenbosch?
The Zolta?
Yeah, can you find that, please?
The Zolta. And you, the patient?
No, my family is, someone attacked my family.
Hey?
Someone has attacked my family in my house.
Okay, so you need the police, or the ambulance?
And an ambulance, please, yes.
Now, who is injured?
I think everyone.
Everyone in your house?
Everyone, 4 people, yes.
Adults, 2 adults?
2 adults and 3 adults and 1 teenage girl, yes.
What are the injuries?
Head injuries.
Are they conscious?
I don't think so. My sister's moving, but that's it.
Are there any suspects on scene?
No, they ran away.
With what were they attacked?
An axe. I think I blacked out and I've just woken up.
With an axe. Okay, stay on the line. I'm going to speak to the police.
Thank you, but please send an ambulance as quickly as possible.
Yes. Hold.
Yes.
I'm going to speak to police to check on your number, where you are. Because you don't know your street name, you say.
The street name is Husker Street.
Okay, I'm not picking it up on the contact number that you're giving me. Okay, what kind of injuries is there?
My family and we were attacked by a guy with an axe.
With an axe?
Unconscious, it is.
Unconscious, huh?
Yes, and bleeding from the head, please.
Okay. For the address. Okay, just wanted to get the right thing here.
Henri remains incredibly calm throughout the 25-minute call, even though it took 5 to 6 minutes just for the dispatcher to confirm his location. I know for me personally, that alone would start to cause frustration. Like, surely, if yourself and your family have just been attacked, you're going to want to help immediately. So how was he able to remain so calm? It's actually quite unsettling. The dispatcher also picked up on his overly calm and relaxed demeanour and considered it to be really odd considering the nature of the incident that he's claiming, especially with his full family's lives and his own being at risk. She had expected a bit more urgency from a trauma victim, which led her to think that it could have even been a prank call. The dispatcher had also picked up on what almost sounded like a little giggle after he said his family were all bleeding from their heads. I'll pop that clip in again and let me know, do you think it's a giggle? Maybe it's a sob or potentially an inaudible word. Let me know what you think it could be.
Unconscious, huh?
Yes, and bleeding from the head, please.
On top of this, at no point did he ask how he could help his family or try to stop any of the bleeding, even after acknowledging that his sister Marley was still moving. Police and paramedics arrived on the scene, but nothing could have prepared them for the totally gruesome scene that they were about to witness. One paramedic reported blood ran like a waterfall down the stairs, adding it was the worst incident that they've seen in their 39-year career. Henri was met by the officers at the back of the property, covered in blood-stained sleeping shorts and socks. The blood later matched with all of his family, but mostly Rudy's and his dad's. The first officer on the scene had said that he could smell alcohol on Henri's breath, also stating he appeared emotional, like he was blowing off steam and nervous, but not crying. They considered his story to be believable, as he'd also sustained minor injuries, and as South Africa's crime rate was especially high at the time, there was many living in fear of the intruder in the mask. Tragically, 3 of the family members were confirmed dead at the scene. 54-year-old Martin and 22-year-old Rudy were both found deceased in the boys' bedroom on the first floor. The injuries are too gruesome to go into too much detail here, but Rudy had suffered the most brutal attack of the 4 victims. He'd suffered extensive lacerations to the head, 5 of which were fatal, and an injury to the brain. All of Martin's injuries were to his back and the back of his head, indicating that he was in fact attacked from behind. He was the only victim to have no self-defence wounds. Heartbreakingly, blood was discovered in Rudy's stomach and in Martin's lungs, indicating they were both still alive for several minutes after the attack. 55-year-old Teresa was also found deceased nearby, in the passageway outside the same bedroom. She'd suffered 2 fatal lacerations to the head. All of the deaths showed to be caused by damage to the brain, with all of the wounds being described as inflicted with tremendous amounts of force and high speed. 16-year-old Marley was also found on the floor near her mum. Miraculously, she was still alive, but only just. Her injuries were described as what would normally have been fatal, and her prognosis on admission was very poor. She suffered 5 deep, life-threatening lacerations to her head, and her self-defense wounds proved that a severe scuffle ensued with her attacker, fighting hard to save her life. Marley spent weeks in a coma and underwent extensive surgery and physiotherapy, but now has absolutely no recollection of that horrific day or the attack. I honestly believe that is probably for the best. Thankfully and miraculously, Marley managed to survive. Her extensive head injuries and her self-defense wounds were used to lead her testimony in court. The paramedics also looked over Henri's injuries. They were so minor in comparison to his family's wounds, consisting of superficial scrapes, bruises, and stab wounds. These injuries were later declared as self-inflicted. Police and paramedics at the time also treated Henri as a victim, as at the time they had absolutely no reason to think otherwise, given the story that Henri had told the officials. Upon their arrival, police stated Henri appeared nervous, panic-stricken, trembling slightly and traumatised, but said that he didn't cry or tear up. Surely that alone is concerning, considering he's just potentially lost his entire family, and surely just the amount of shock that you'd understandably be in. 18 months had passed before Henri had finally handed himself into police on the 13th of June 2016, under instructions from his lawyer. The following day he appeared in Stellenbosch court, facing 3 charges of murder, 1 charge of attempted murder, and 1 charge of obstructing the course of justice. He was released with his bail set at 100,000 rand, which is the equivalent of $7,965 or £5,975. He was told that he had to keep checking in with the police and not to leave Western Cape. Knowing that her brother had just been charged for the murder of all of her family, as well as the attempted murder on herself, was especially distressing for Marley at the time. 10 months later, on the 4th of April 2017, Henri van Breda's murder trial began at Western Cape High Court. Henri still maintained his innocence throughout the 68-day trial. He stuck by the very same story that he originally told police on the day of the attack, that an intruder broke in and murdered his mum, dad and brother and attempted to murder his sister and himself. Prosecutors, however, pointed to many inconsistencies within his testimony. Henri had claimed that it may have been a possible burglary, but why would an intruder seeking to rob ignore valuable items downstairs and instead embark on a killing spree on the first floor? Detectives pointed out that the appearance of the ground floor did not remotely give the impression of a typical burglary. Items of value, including phones, laptops, purses and wallets, were all easily accessible but had all been left behind. Why wake the suspected sleeping residents on the first floor if the intention was theft? On top of this, there was no sign of forced entry into the property. The electric fence and the security footage from the estate were both checked, only to reveal that there was nothing out of the ordinary going on that night. Security experts state that not even Houdini could have broken in that night. Henri couldn't answer to any of these inconsistencies, nor could he explain why he managed to escape the deep gashes that all of his family had suffered. An expert analysed these gashes and determined that there was only one attacker applying the same amount of force on each victim, with his brother Rudy suffering the most brutal attack. It was also determined that these injuries were inflicted with the intent to kill. Prosecutors also questioned his time delay in calling for the emergency services. Why such a delay if the intention was to help? As we'd previously mentioned, Henri claims to have passed out during these missing hours, which his defence has suggested that he suffered from a previously undiagnosed epilepsy and endured a mild seizure which rendered him unconscious for that amount of time. But even more damning evidence came to light when they discovered that the weapons that had been used in the crime came from within the Van Breda household. The family cleaner confirmed he recognised the knife from their kitchen, and the same axe, although rarely ever used, was normally found in their utility room. The police had found the bloody axe on the stairs leading up to the horror scene, and the knife that Henri had claimed to have pulled out of his side during the scuffle with the attacker was found ever so slightly under Rudy's bed. About the only thing that does match Henri's story were the 3 cigarette butts found on the floor in the kitchen that he'd smoked while talking to emergency services. But for what possible reason would someone try to kill their entire family? To this day, Henri has never given a reason, as we've already mentioned, he's still claiming to be a victim himself. However, a couple of possible motives have been suggested. The first being that he simply wanted to inherit his family's fortune. His dad, Martin, was a really successful businessman, owning a multi-million-dollar estate. But the second possibility, and the one that many believe, is that the pressure of not living up to expectations of his seemingly perfect family may have driven him to the edge only months after arriving in Africa. It's thought that maybe jealousy of Rudy living up to the perfect image sparked the savage attack, which may be why Rudy was attacked first and most brutally. It's also been reported that he had a drug addiction, which led to his parents cutting his allowance if he didn't clean up his act. No drugs, however, had been found in his system on the night of the attack. Also, none of these possible motives have been officially confirmed. So still to this day, only he knows the mystery behind what potentially snapped in his mind that night. A neighbour a few hundred metres away from their home also testified that she heard loud arguing voices that night between 10 and 12 p.m. Henri's defence, however, tried to argue that this was the Star Trek film that the family were claimed to have been watching that night. But the neighbour knows that what she heard was not a film with a soundtrack. She even claimed that it had been that disturbing that she'd even gotten a fright. Henri denies having a serious argument with his family and said that there was nothing out of the ordinary going on the night of the attack. The court had also asked Henri to reenact the attack of the night, and officials have said that usually trauma victims wouldn't necessarily be able to remember exactly how the attack was carried out, but Henri was able to pretty much remember all of the choreography from the attack that night.
Both arms? Both arms? Yes. And then go basically start retreating.
And the type of motion that he used?
The prosecutor said, "One would like to think that there is something wrong with a person who does something like this. We want to know that there's something wrong, because otherwise the possibility is there that each one of us are capable of something like this." Henri's defence asked for a merciful sentence, highlighting that it's Henri's first offence and that he was barely 20 when he carried out the murders. They say that Henri can't show any remorse, as he still maintains his innocence. South Africa doesn't have a jury system, so the verdict is solely left to the judge. He called Henri a cold-blooded murderer and said, "Your future was not bleak. In fact, it was bright. You had the support of your family, and more importantly, they had the means to assist you in your future endeavours. And it seems to me that they would have done so." He also went on to say,
"The violence was excessive and gratuitous. It was intended to cause maximum harm. The clear intent was to kill her as well."
Henri showed little to no emotion throughout his time in court, even when receiving his sentencing. It's reported that sometimes he looked uncomfortable and other times he looked confident. The 23-year-old was found guilty on all charges, consisting of 3 counts of murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of obstructing the course of justice.
Your conduct warrants the severest possible penalty. On count 1, the murder of Henri van Breda, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. On count 2, the murder of Martin van Breda, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. On count 3, the murder of Theresa van Breda, you are sentenced to life imprisonment. For the attempted murder of Marley van Breda, you are sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. On count 5, obstructing the course of justice, for the administration of justice, as set out in the charge sheet, you are sentenced to 12 months imprisonment.
He received 3 life sentences in total, 1 life sentence for each of the murdered victims, plus an additional 15 years for the attempted murder of his sister, and another 12 months for obstructing the course of justice. So I think it's safe to say that this maniac is never getting out of prison, and quite rightfully so. The judge had said that a guilty verdict was inescapable. Maybe you'll be shocked to hear, though, that 2 of Henri's family and friends still believe his innocence. The first being his aunt Lynta Nell. She said, "I do know that the person who did this definitely wasn't the Henri I know. If it was him, something must have happened in his brain that night to make him act totally different." She also claims that the assumed giggling on the emergency services call was her nephew stuttering. She says that he's an introvert, so when he doesn't know someone, he'll stutter, and that he's been like that since he was young. The second person is his current girlfriend, Daniela, who he actually met after being arrested for the murders. They met in an elevator during a cooking course that they were both enrolled on, and Daniela later found out who he was online. She claims that she always felt safe with Henri, and that Henri had told her everything that had happened. She's also said that she just doesn't think that everything quite adds up, and that there isn't enough evidence to say that Henri is the murderer. She thinks that the inconsistencies within his story is from the seizure that he had while he was unconscious, which has resulted since in memory loss. She watched her boyfriend through tears as he was taken away after his sentencing. Neither of the 2, however, have ever actually asked him directly if he is the one who committed the murders. Is that not the first thing you'd be wanting to ask them? Henri's been described by his neighbours as always having been the black sheep of the family, but that he was also well-mannered. Martin's brother Cornelius has said that Martin and Theresa were really loving people and had absolutely no enemies or grudges with anybody. All of the Van Breda family have been described as being really intelligent and well educated. Martin was very well respected within the business community for his achievements and integrity. He's described as a dominant figure and a strong man. Theresa had also been really looking forward to a cooking course in Italy, and her sister-in-law, Lynta Nell, said that she misses her gentle-natured, cheerful young sister more than words can express. As we already know, Rudy was flourishing with his studies back in Melbourne, where friends remember him as warm, kind and unique. Not a lot is mentioned about Marley, but the trauma of what she has suffered, as well as losing her full family overnight, is absolutely unthinkable and heartbreaking. I really hope that she's healing well mentally and physically and goes on to live as normal life as possible. I hope that the affected family and friends of the Van Bredas can also heal from this horrific family tragedy. So that is everything that I have on this particular case. Do you think that Henri is guilty? And if you do, what do you think might have been his motive? I also just wanted to add that I really appreciate all of your support So please remember to subscribe so you don't miss any more of my upcoming videos. Thank you.